It was a Tuesday like any other, or so I thought. I was finishing up a long hike, deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was getting crisp, and the usual evening sounds of the woods were starting to fill the silence. But then, I heard another sound, a soft rustling in the underbrush behind me. I stopped, listened. It wasn't the usual scamper of a squirrel or a deer. This was heavier, more deliberate. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in the fading light and started walking again. But the sound followed. A twig snapped. A soft, almost hesitant footfall. My heart started to race a little. You hear stories out here. Legends whispered around campfires. I quickened my pace, my boots crunching on the gravel path leading back to my cabin. The rustling kept pace with me, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. I didn't dare look back. I just wanted to get inside, lock the door and chalk it up to an overactive imagination fueled by too many spooky podcasts. When I finally reached my cabin, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking slightly. I threw the door open, roused inside, and slammed it shut, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. The woods outside were silent again. I stood there for a full minute, just breathing. Then, a soft thud against the door made me jump. My heart leaped into my throat. This was Italiano. Whatever was out there had followed me all the way home. I crept over to the small peephole, my breath held tight in my chest. What I saw made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It wasn't a bear, or a cougar, or some prankster in a suit. Peering back at me with wide, curious, and surprisingly gentle eyes was a young creature, covered in shaggy brown fur. It looked ... lost and scared. It was small for its kind, I guessed. Maybe just a juvenile. A young Bigfoot. It wasn't menacing at all. In fact, it looked more like a confused teenager who had lost its way. It took a step back from the door, sat down on my porch steps, and let out a soft, mournful sigh that sounded less like a monster's roar and more like a lonely cry. My fear instantly evaporated, replaced by a wave of something else. Compassion. This wasn't a monster from a horror story. This was a young, living being, seemingly alone and distressed. All the legends paint them as fearsome beasts, but looking at this one, all I saw was vulnerability. I slowly unlocked the door, my hand hesitating on the knob. What was I doing? This was insane, but I couldn't just leave it out there. I cracked the door open just a few inches. The creature looked up, its large, dark eyes locking onto mine. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just watched me. "Hey there," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Are you okay?" It tilted its head, a strangely human-like gesture of curiosity. It then let out a soft, low rumble, not of aggression, but more like a question. I opened the door a little wider. I had a leftover stew from dinner warming on the stove, and the smell was filling the cabin. The young Bigfoot's nose twitched, and its eyes darted towards the source of the delicious aroma. It was clearly hungry. Taking a massive leap of faith, I opened the door all the way. I gestured inside. "You hungry?" I asked, feeling ridiculous talking to it, but it seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. Slowly, hesitantly, it stood up. It was still taller than me, probably around 7 feet, but it had a lanky, awkward build, like a teenager who hadn't quite grown into their body. It took a cautious step onto the porch, then another into my cabin. It had to duck its head to get through the doorway. Once inside, it stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room, looking around with wide-eyed wonder at the strange human world of bookshelves, a sofa, and a flickering television screen. It sniffed the air again, its attention fixed on the kitchen. I walked over to the stove, my heart still pounding, but not with fear anymore. It was more like ... I ladled a generous portion of the beef and vegetable stew into my largest bowl and placed it on the floor. I wasn't sure if it would eat it, or how. The young creature watched my every move. It approached the bowl slowly, sniffed it cautiously, and then dipped a large, furry finger into the stew. It brought the finger to its mouth, tasted it, and its eyes went wide. It then let out a happy little rumble and began to scoop up the stew with its hands, eating with a voracious but surprisingly neat appetite. I just stood there and watched, a smile spreading across my face. When it finished, it looked up at me and made a series of soft, cooing sounds. It almost sounded like a thank you. For the rest of the evening, we existed in a strange, silent understanding. I sat on my couch, and it sat on the floor, occasionally looking over at me with those big, intelligent eyes. It seemed fascinated by the television, tilting its head at the flashing images and sounds. I named him Ben. It just seemed to fit. He wasn't a monster, he was just Ben. As the night wore on, A grew sleepy, eventually curling up on the large rug in front of the fireplace, letting out a soft, rumbling snore. I had a Bigfoot sleeping in my living room. My life had officially become a fairy tale, or maybe a very strange documentary. I couldn't believe this was happening. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of something clattering in the kitchen. I rushed out to find Ben attempting to get a glass of water from the sink. He had seen me do it the night before and was trying to mimic the action, albeit clumsily, splashing water everywhere. I couldn't help but laugh. He turned and gave me a look. There was a perfect mix of embarrassment and pride. I showed him how the faucet worked, and he learned quickly, drinking straight from the tap like an oversized cat. We spent the day together. I showed him around the cabin, and he showed a surprising level of intelligence and curiosity. He was fascinated by books, gently turning the pages with his large fingers, looking at the pictures. He loved music and would sit and listen quietly when I played my guitar, swaying his head back and forth to the rhythm. It became clear that he wasn't just some wild animal. He was sentient. He had feelings, thoughts, and a personality. He was playful, gentle, and incredibly lonely. I realized he hadn't followed me home out of aggression. He had followed me because he saw a light, heard a voice, and was seeking connection. But I knew this couldn't last. As much as I had grown to care for Ben, he didn't belong in my world. He was a creature of the wild, and he needed to be with his own kind. He was getting more comfortable, but I could see a sadness in his eyes, a longing for the vast forests he came from. The hardest part was figuring out how to say goodbye. How do you explain to a Bigfoot that he has to go home? That night, I sat with him by the fire, just like the first night. I talked to him, not sure if he understood the words, but hoping he understood the feeling behind them. You have a family out there, Ben, I said softly. They're probably worried sick about you. You need to go find them. He looked at me, his expression somber. He reached out and gently patted my shoulder, a gesture of comfort he must have learned from watching me. It was a heart-wrenching moment. He knew. The next morning, I packed a small bag for him with some apples and a jar of peanut butter, which he had developed a serious love for. I walked him to the edge of the forest, back to the trail where our strange journey began. He stood at the tree line, looking from the deep woods back to me in my little cabin. AC mid-turn? I gave him a gentle nudge. Go on, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Go home. He let out one last, soft rumble, a sound I had come to know as his way of communicating. It was a sound of farewell. He gave me one final look, then turned and disappeared into the dense foliage. The forest swallowed him up, and he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he vanished. The woods were silent once again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It felt empty. I walked back to my cabin, and the silence inside was even louder. His spot on the rug was empty. The giant bowl was clean and put away. It was like it had all been a dream, but I knew it wasn't. Ben was real. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll catch a glimpse of a tall, furry figure walking among the trees on one of my hikes. I hope he found his family. I hope he's happy. He taught me that the world is so much bigger and more mysterious than we can ever imagine. And sometimes, the so-called monsters are just lonely souls looking for a little bit of kindness. They just need someone. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever had an unexplainable experience in the wild, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the unknown.